The School of Fiction.
Hi, this is Matt. Welcome to the School of Fiction channel. Today I'm going to talk about point of view. There are three basic points of view, all with some variations. I'm going to cover all of them today. We're starting with the first person point of view, which has the I pronoun used for a single character. In the second person point of view, the pronoun used is you, but it's not the reader who is the character, but a character within the story who is encouraged to feel close to the reader. And then third person will say with a single character at a time, normally, and we'll follow with that character who's described using the name and the appropriate pronoun for that character. So the origin of the person terms is English grammar. First person singular is I, first person plural is we, second person is you, third person singular is she, he, or it, and third person plural is they. So which point of view you select depends upon first what you feel like doing, because we all have our preferences and our tastes, and next the needs of the story, including of course the genre conventions, what would be typical for a work in the genre you've chosen to write. Limited and omniscient are two terms that you should know. Most of you learned them in school if you were American students. A limited point of view allows the narration to include only what the central character knows and experiences, very much limited to that person's knowledge, to that person's sensory experience, to that person's location. An omniscient point of view allows the narration to include anything at all, although there are limitations to that based on what works or what's good. To count as omniscient, we have to allow the possibility of any information being brought in within the range of the skill of the writer. The limited point of view is more common. It presents a lot fewer problems either for readers or for composition. It causes trouble only when you need to provide information for the reader that the central character can't have, and there are ways around that, and I'll tell you what some of them are. The omniscient point of view is mainly useful when you want independent voice of your own that you can use to comment on the characters, so you can have a narrative voice. If you randomly blurt whatever you're thinking about, it will get the reader disoriented, so you have to get it right. That means this point of view is a challenge, and there are, of course, some strategies that I'm going to tell you about that can help you. So I made this point of view overview, as it were. First person, limited is the easiest. There's just one I narrator. I would not recommend that you switch from one I narrator to another. Say, new I narrator in the next chapter. That could be very confusing for readers. First person omniscient. You need a godlike protagonist. I'm going to talk about that a little more. It's rare, though. Second person narration uses you, but it's still the viewpoint of a character. It's just that using you has certain changes to how the reader perceives it. Second person omniscient, I'm not aware of this existing. Be interested if you do know of a case where it was used in a work that was read by anybody. Please tell me about it so I can expand my knowledge. Third person limited is easy. It's good for a book with multiple featured characters. It's what you use if you want to switch from one character to another between chapters, and some genres really like this. Third person omniscient has a strong narrative voice. You can also use a technique called indirect discourse, which is going to be explained in a little while in this video. So, first person limited, where most writers start. The narration is limited by the main character's senses and the main character's knowledge, as I've already said. This one creates an emotional intimacy between the reader and the character. You can share any thoughts and feelings that one character has. So entirely, the reader and the character become like one person in that sense. You need to find some tricky ways to give information the character wouldn't know. Those tricky ways are coming up. Here's one thing that got in my way. If your character has limited writing ability, then it's an annoying feature that you can't use your full authorial voice. You have to find ways to be clear and eloquent, even though that character doesn't have the ability to do so. So, how do you add extra information first person limited? You can have other characters narrate. You can have other characters just come and talk to your main character. They can be written diaries, they can be messages, text messages, emails, and that way you mix in other narration or other information. You can also have the narrator see documents, photos, or other media. It can watch videos and so on. That's the ways that the characters can find out things that the character did not experience. You can also very sparingly, be very careful about this, have the narrator say, I learned later what happened, and then describe something that she didn't know at the time of the main action. If you do this constantly, it will probably annoy the readers, but it has gotten me out of a jam a few times to do that. The first person omniscient is extremely rare. The narrator has to be some non-human entity that can read minds or disregard time limitations. I did look up and found some cases where it was done. The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, because the narrator is death, so death is beyond human. And then Amy Tan uses a ghost character in Saving Fish from Drowning. These are two books I'm looking forward to reading. The third person limited is also as popular, nearly as popular as first person, and some genres more popular. In this one, you use the character's name and pronouns. You don't use I. The action is limited still by the point of view character's senses and knowledge. You still go into the thoughts and feelings of the POV character, so it's the same as first person in that sense, only the pronoun really changes. This is ideal if you want to alternate characters among chapters. If you have a novel that needs to cover multiple character arcs, I wrote, for example, some works which switched between the two members of a couple. So each chapters would alternate between the heroine and the hero. This is also very common in thrillers and in some fantasy genre, where a lot of characters are included in order to tell a broader story. What your character that you're talking about now in this slot doesn't know can't be narrated, same as in first limited point of view, but you can still use those narrative techniques I gave you for first person limited. Omniscient is the narrator as an authorial voice, like a storyteller. While it could be what you consider your own authentic voice as a writer, usually it's a perspective you've created, a narrator as character, who will have some kind of a slant or some kind of a voice that is different from what would be like to have a conversation with you. There's a number of strengths and weaknesses. So one strength of this is you can give any information to the reader that makes sense and feels right. Another strength is that visual description can be more comprehensive. Third-person omniscient narrators would tend to describe entire landscapes. They tend to make comments about communities, things like that. Another strength, you can have the narrator explain things that will be relevant later. You don't have to say why they're relevant. You just explain that particular fact or detail. Another strength, it's easier to insert flashbacks and flash forwards because the reader is not wondering how the character could know that. Yet another strength, you can write the best prose you're capable of. The narrator is a default writing expert, so you can really break out your best sentence structures and your best vocabulary, your best figurative language, and so on. And the final strength I wanted to point out is that your narrator can have an attitude, sassy, funny, judgy, anything that you like. First person limited can also do this, but third omniscient is the best way to do it. You have a godlike voice that just says whatever and conveys the overall opinion about the action, which may be useful for entertaining your reader. There are a couple of weaknesses. One of them is that in third person omniscient, you might be tempted to create what most people consider a mistake, that is head hopping, moving between the thoughts of multiple characters in the same scene. This is tempting because it expands narrative possibilities, but it causes confusion. Another weakness, you may find yourself being too emotionally manipulative, trying really hard to tell readers how to feel by using your authorial voice. So you want to avoid that. Earlier, I mentioned free and direct discourse. This is a strategy that was the specialty of Jane Austen. I'm not saying she originated it, but she's known for it. The narrator has all the usual freedoms of the authorial voice I've been talking about, but chooses to incorporate the protagonist's thoughts as facts. So here are some examples that I found from janeausten.co.uk. The first one is from Sense and Sensibility. Now, Marianne would have thought herself very excusable had she been able at all to sleep the first night after parting from Willoughby. She would have been ashamed to look her family in the face the next morning had she not risen from a bed in more need of repose than when she lay down in it. So this is really what Marianne is thinking, but it's also judging on her at the same time. And here's another one. This is from Emma. Emma is an unreliable viewpoint character because she is constantly being surprised by her own mistakes. He stopped again, rose again, and seemed quite embarrassed. He was more in love with her than Emma had supposed, and who could say how it might have ended if his father had not made his appearance? Mr. Woodhouse soon followed, and the necessity of exertion made him composed. This Emma is incorrect. This fellow is not in love with her. And this goes to show how closely, despite being omniscient, how closely we got into this point of view. But also, as you see, the narrator is able to tell us about Mr. Woodhouse's feelings, although it's not head-hopping. Hope you enjoyed. Since I was putting astronauts on Mars, I decided to put Jane Austen on Mars as well. I'm a big fan of Jane Austen. So free and direct discourse, I would definitely read some more works, some full works by Austen to get a feel for this, or to find another author who does it. Now I'm moving over to second person limited. The main character is described as you, but it's still a character. But the reader is encouraged to feel very closely connected to the character, and I've said claustrophobically so. There's almost no distance encouraged by this point of view. So it's uncommon in novels. I've located a book that does it, The Night Circus by Aaron Morgenstern, which I have put on my to-be-read list. Most commonly, I've seen this in short fiction. First and second person plural points of view would be extremely rare. First person point of view would use we as the pronoun. So a group of people are sharing the experiences, like a community narration. I found it in the poem Richard Cory by Edward Arlington Robinson, but that's only a 16-line poem. And I'll share it on the right. He was rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we, that's the whole town, thought that he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. So on we worked and waited for the light and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory one summer night went home and put a bullet through his head. So the whole point of view is the whole town, everybody is just all envious of Richard Cory, which means they don't understand why he unalived himself. So going back to the left at the bottom, the second person plural point of view would still use you, but it would be plural. We don't really have a facility for this in terms of our English writing style or English language grammar. We can say y'all, yous, or you people, but I don't think those would work very well in fiction. And they all have kind of class associations which are negative. So these do not seem to me to be good for sustained fiction, but you may surprise me and do them well. So I'm moving to examples. Here is the same fight in 3 points of view. First person limited, this is a fight between Chris and Kim. So in the first person limited, it's Kim's point of view. Chris came at me so fast, I hardly knew where the punches were coming from. So we're very tightly in Kim's point of view here. We don't know anything that Kim doesn't know. She's like, where are the punches coming from? I dodged by instinct, no chance to think. So pretty much she can't tell us what her actions were, only that she dodged without being able to make any decisions about it. I got a cold feeling in my gut. There's an immediate sensory experience. Felt my feet moving like back in my basketball days. And again, her movement of her feet is given its origin in her past, the only thing that she can think of. Lost control of my thoughts as I tackled him back into the tree. So Kim is in a fight mode, and her ability to narrate is limited to what she could perceive when she's in the fight mode, because when you're in a fight mode, you tend to have a narrowness of focus. Third person limited. Now we are still with Kim, but Kim is being described with her name and pronouns. Chris came at Kim so fast she hardly knew where the punches were coming from. It's the same point of view because we're still limited. So it's the identical perception to first limited. Instinct kicked in, made her dodge. She got a cold feeling in her gut, did a stutter step she hadn't planned. Now I'm able to step out a little bit and show what her move is because I'm in third person. Next thing she knew, she had tackled him back into the tree. It's really not that different. I tweaked it slightly for differences. I was able to give a little more description, but still not too much. Now, in the third Omniscient, I can interpret. Battle was joined. I used a little authorial voice there. Chris attacked Kim all unawares and came at her fast. So I'm able to say some things about Chris's motion, even though our point of view is still with Kim. Without her instinct, Kim would have been KO'd. I'm interpreting, I'm explaining. But Kim had the instinct of violence. I told you something about her. Cold in her gut. There's that same cold in the gut and same instinct that we had in the first person. But in the third person, Omniscient, I'm evaluating Kim even as I describe her. She dodged, weaved, lunged, tackled him back into the tree. I used a more complex grammatical and sentence structure here because in the third person Omniscient, I can use more of my voice. I'm not as tightly in on the character's perceptions and experiences. So I hope this is helpful to you. I would definitely suggest you should go looking for additional examples of this. If you have questions, please, first of all, please like and subscribe, then post your questions in the comments below. I'm going to read every comment on every video, and I'm going to try to respond to them. If they're technique questions, I'll respond with a comment or with a new video.